Derek, Amber, Kyle, Sophie, and Megan ran all the way back to the basement of the house. There, they took a few minutes to rest, yet it wasn't long until they heard the moaning voices of the undead floating up the stairwell towards them. "I can't keep going," Megan said. "I just can't." Yet even as she spoke, her energy returned little by little, as did everyone else's. Before anyone was ready to keep running, the moans seemed right behind them, the walls of stone causing their unified voices to be amplified. Derek pushed himself off the wall, still catching his breath. "We have to keep moving," he said, though he didn't sound too confident. Amber voiced what he was thinking. "And go where?" she said. "We can't keep running. We need a plan." Even she was on the verge of tears. "None of us are going to make it at this rate." "What about Jason and Ryan?" Kyle said. "We can't give up on them," Sophie said, her eyes pleading. Everyone became silent at the mention of their friends. Derek wanted to hold on to his earlier resolve to never leave his friends behind. Yet now that he has seen what became of Ryan, with his own eyes, despair filled him with a colorless sense of hopelessness. Amber slammed her fist onto the ground, getting to her feet, wobbling dangerously. "Ryan is already gone," she said. "We saw what happens when someone is taken." Her hands shook as her voice lowered to a whisper full of dread. "We are all going to end up just like that if we don't escape." Sophie looked like she wanted to argue. Her mouth remained a thin line on her face. Derek could now see into Amber's heart. He saw it so clearly that he almost couldn't believe he was so blind before. The one thing that Amber feared most in the world was the idea of her free will being taken away. The thought of being a shell of herself or to lose her personality was worse than death. He reached out and took her hand. She looked at him, her eyes wild with fright and desperation. He tried to give her a brave and reassuring look. Her eyes locked onto his, and they became teary. He looked at the others, then down the dark stairwell where the voices announced the oncoming of their haunting pursuers. He clenched his free hand and gestured for the rest to follow. "Let's get out of here. All of us. Together," he said. The group visibly relaxed and regained some of their spirits at his words. They left the stairwell and came again to the bottom of the basement stairs leading to the ground floor. They listened for the creature that stalked the house, but heard nothing. This did not comfort them much, but they had no choice. There was no going back. So, with Derek leading the group, they ventured back upstairs and into the house. When they emerged from the basement, nothing was the same as it had been. The house was different in almost every way possible. Now, instead of a well-kept modern home, it was a dank, musty, and ruined stone structure. "Geez, did we just walk into Dracula's castle?" Kyle said, then shivered. "It's freezing." They all agreed. The air was now cold, and a wind could be felt blowing through the long hall. Cracked columns reached up to a crumbling ceiling. They could see a gray sky moving through spaces that caved in. The ground was uneven stone. Something happened here, they came to notice. A battle of some kind. Scorch marks were left on the walls, and dark splotches covered every surface imaginable. They guessed what it must be. Blood. "This wasn't a battle," Amber said. "It was a massacre." "I don't like this," Megan said. She grabbed Sophie's trembling hand. Derek looked around, wondering which way they should go. They had never come to this version of the house before. He wondered what new horrors waited for them in this abandoned castle. A sound came from above, and to their horror, they saw a shadow pass through the grayness. It was huge, winged, and had a shape all of them had seen before in different forms of media. "Okay," Kyle said, hiding himself behind a huge chunk of fallen ceiling. Now we have dragons to worry about. We have to keep moving, Derek said. They made their way through the hall with careful steps. They kept shooting glances upwards to the sky, yet they did not hear or see anything move up there again. They came to the end of the hall where a door stood closed. It struck them as odd. The door was unmarred and even unmarked in any way. Derek grasped the door handle. He looked back at the others. They nodded and he pulled. The door resisted, and he found that he had to put all his strength into getting the door open, even a crack. The hinges creaked loudly, creating an echo that bounced off the walls around them, seeming to go on forever. Kyle stepped in and helped. Together, they pried the door open wide enough to let them through one at a time. Beyond the door was utter darkness. They stared into the ominous void for a long time. None of them wanted to see what was on the other side. Derek was afraid there would be nothing, just unending darkness. "Are we going through, or what?" Kyle said. Derek hesitated. He tried to think of some other way. "We have no choice," Megan said. "We have to go in." Amber nodded. "What if this is exactly where the house wants us to go?" Derek said. "I don't know, guys," Sophie said. "I don't know if I can face that dark again." Megan gave Sophie a supporting glance and then put a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Derek, you are not responsible for this," she said. He stared at her, amazed that she saw right through him. "None of this is your fault. We just need to move forward." Derek gritted his teeth. "You're right. Come on. I'll go first," he said. He stepped forward, right up to the barrier of darkness. Then he took a breath and moved in. He was swallowed completely by the emptiness. On the other side, Derek found himself back in the house they had entered originally. He only had a moment to orient himself, because in the next instant, the red mist was swirling around him. Kyle, Amber, and Megan all came through in quick succession. Sophie appeared after a slight pause. He turned, panicked. Go back," he said. They all saw the mist and immediately tried to go back through the door. Yet there was no door. There was a solid wall now. A large picture was framed where the door had once been. In it was Ryan and Jason. They were looking forward, grinning. They were corpses. Megan screamed, and Kyle gave a terrified moan. Amber's mouth simply went slack, and Sophie raised her arms as if to shield herself from a blow. In the picture, the dead Ryan and Jason lifted their arms in invitation. Black blood ran from their eyes. "Run," Derek said, as the mist continued to close in around them. They moved just in time, narrowly escaping before the mist cut off every exit. They took off down the hallway. The house was endless now, seeming to contain endless rooms and hallways. Where it had seemed empty before, now it was filled with activity and things. They came to the first room and stopped as they saw a woman strapped down on an operating table. 3 figures in medical garb loomed over her. She was screaming, and there was blood dripping from the table onto the floor. It was then that Derek noticed the red-stained scalpels in their hands. Megan screamed, and the figures turned towards them. Derek saw that they had weird smiles behind their masks. There was something moving under them, as if their mouths were made of writhing maggots. The woman continued to scream in pain. Then she raised her head, the only part of her body that she could freely move, and began to slam it backwards onto the table. She did so with such force that there was a wet crack as she began to split her own skull open. Derek wanted to help. He couldn't watch this and do nothing. Then something happened that turned his thoughts of heroism to blind terror. The woman's screams started to oddly sound like manic laughter. Before he could really decide if that was true, she spoke. "It comes," she said with mad delirium. "My child is here." Her belly bulged outwards in a freakish, flesh-colored balloon. The skin became so thin that the light penetrated it, and to everyone's horror, they saw the shape of something inside. Its movements were spasmic, and it was not human. Several points along the belly were now pressed outwards. Black blood spurted from the woman as something began to break through. Then one finally did, and a long, black, clawed leg burst through. It was bristled and reminded Derek very much of the tarantulas that had mesmerized him at the pet store. Except this one was 100 times bigger and being born from a human woman right in front of his eyes. More legs burst forth, and Megan's mind finally broke, her arachnophobia completely taking her over. She sprinted from the room, screaming. That broke the spell for the rest of them, and they took off after her. Derek looked back to check and saw that no one was chasing them. He also saw, with disgusted horror, the shadow of the giant spider emerge completely from the woman's body. The spider turned a few times, looked down into the mother's face. Then it lowered its head down, mandibles working. Then it began to feed. Derek turned away, tears flowing down his cheeks, and tried not to puke as he ran. Each room held a new horror for them to witness, yet they were blurs, as the group did not stop again. They only caught the briefest of glances of the gore, death, and madness. At the windows, ominous shapes glided past or looked in with glowing eyes. The sound of rusty hinges screamed endlessly in the air. A thought weighed on each of their minds, that the house was no longer playing with its food. It was hungry, and all the nightmarish residents were coming out of their hiding places for the feast. Just as they were coming to the end of another hallway, the walls morphed around them. Suddenly, they were boxed into a single room. All around them, things rearranged themselves. The furniture, light fixtures, decorations, and even the paint came to life. Faces and hands appeared, twisting and stretching the once solid physical surfaces and objects like dough. Voices called out to them. "Join us," they said. "Become part of the moving house." "No," Megan said, trying to shut out the sound. Amber screamed, grabbing her head and writhing. Derek felt as if pins and needles were being forced into his mind. Sophie could only moan in pain. Kyle, though, he stared forward, his eyes having gained a strange, vacant expression. He reached forward, his lips moving. He seemed to be seeing something pleasant far off. A small smile splayed on his face. Derek's eyes went wide with alarm. He's seen that smile before. Ryan had that same look right before the monster took him. The wall before Kyle extended forward, huge hands reaching. An elongated face appeared, the eyes shining. It was reaching right towards the mesmerized boy. "No, not again," Derek said and rushed forward. He tackled Kyle to the ground. The light in the thing's eyes flickered and it paused momentarily, as if confused. It lasted only a moment before it bore down on them again. Kyle was just regaining his senses when the light fell upon him and Derek. Derek now felt his jaw go slack. Kyle also fell into the trance again. The hands gathered around them and began to close. No one noticed Amber go to the wall and snap off a brass candle holder. It immediately became rigid again as it separated from the wall. She ran towards the creature with a warrior's cry. Then she jammed the jagged metal end into the webbed flesh of the nightmare's hand. The creature let out a howl of pain and rage. The light flickered and went out. The boys shook their heads as the hands retracted. "Come on," Amber said, ripping the brass stake out of the hand and stumbling backwards. "Follow me." Then she stabbed the wall and found it tore away like paper. She tore a bigger hole in the wall, revealing nothingness. Megan and Sophie quickly offered support to the boys, and together they hobbled towards the opening, looking like they were running a three-legged race. The creature roared and lunged at them with its 100 hands. The kids all screamed and dove into the opening. For a moment, they were falling, Then they all hit wood floor. All of them were up in an instant, peering around for the monster. It was gone. "Wait a minute," Kyle said. "Don't you guys recognize this?" "You guys have been here before?" Megan said, astonished. Her and Sophie shared a knowing look. Derek looked around, the table, the fireplace, the chairs and benches. He looked to the window and saw the chest. He opened it. There were the same blankets and pillows. They all turned when they heard a footfall at the top of the stairs. A figure of a man was up there. He was looking down at them, but his features were concealed in shadow. He said nothing, and Derek got a bad feeling. "Hey, sorry for barging back in unannounced," Kyle said. The man said nothing, but continued to stare back at them. "Sir?" Megan said. The man's head jerked towards her, making her recoil. Something slithered out from the man's silhouette and into the air. It made its way slowly down towards them. Derek and Kyle stepped in front of the girls and backed them away. They heard a sickening sound as something like slime dripped onto the stairs with loud splats. The substance hissed and steamed. What came into the light was something like a very long, ribbed tongue. It was a pale pink color, and it was slick with thick, transparent fluid. The children were so frozen with terror that they could not even think to scream. It approached them, coming to about eye level. Then the end slowly split open into several folds. Rows of sharp teeth lined the long tunnel of the thing they now identified as a leech-like monstrosity. It hissed at them like a snake, the teeth inside rippling. Kyle's bladder released, spreading a dark pool down his pants. The rest could only tremble. They heard footsteps as the man began to descend the stairs. When he spoke, his voice was different from the last time Derek heard it. It was no longer anything that could be considered human. "At last," he said, stopping halfway down the stairs, entombed in shadow. "The blood we have been seeking." "We?" Derek said, barely finding his voice. "Who are you really?" The man gave an insectile hiss. "Wretched youngling," he said. "You dare to question your god?" "God?" Amber said through clenched teeth. "What are you saying?" The man did not answer. The leech hissed and inched forward. The mouth flaps waved in the air, oozing saliva. It chose Megan as its target. She tried to squirm backwards, but there was nowhere to go. Her back was up against the wall. Everyone seemed paralyzed with fear. The leech tongue poised back to strike. Then, something incredible happened. Amber, Derek, Sophie, and Kyle locked eyes. For one singular moment, they practically heard each other's thoughts. It was the same thought. Over their dead bodies, were they going to let another one of their friends get taken while doing nothing to save them? Amber grabbed a fireplace poker. Derek grabbed a chair, and Kyle grabbed a large wooden toy in the shape of a soldier. Sophie grabbed a stone statue from a shelf. All together they struck at the demonic tongue. It shrieked as they batted it away. The man cried out in dismayed anger. "Insolence!" he said, coming down the stairs. The children, terrified of seeing the man's face, ran. They bolted to the door. Derek reached it first. He grabbed the latch and yanked as hard as he could. The door rattled but did not swing open. His world became blind panic. Then Kyle saved them all by flipping the lock. "Go, go!" Amber shouted, taking a look behind her. The leech was after them, behind. The man plodded with even, patient steps. Derek knew that if he saw the man's face and what it had become, he would go insane. He wrenched open the door, and the four of them stumbled into the night air. A terrible roar sounded behind them. When they turned around to look, the man was in the doorway, but the door swung shut with a tremendous slam. Then, the night was silent again. It only lasted for a moment before they all heard something heavy move in the woods. They turned around, peering into the trees. They saw nothing. Yet something was moving towards them with a lumbering gait. That's when Derek remembered the warning he and the others had received the last time they were here. Never go out at night. Terror shot through Derek as he remembered what happened when that rule was broken. The thing in the woods moved. Then eyes appeared at the forest's edge. The voices of an animal throng pulsed in the air. It quickly became a raucous and violent torrent of sound. It sounded as if they were surrounded by hundreds of them. All the while, the glowing eyes stared in on them. Red mist seeped from the edge of the forest, covering the ground with its ominous, ethereal form. Derek wanted to scream, but somehow could not. The others were in the same shocked silence. "No," he said, his voice quivering. "What have I done?" The thing that took Ryan loomed behind the sea of eyes, its own eyes blazing to life as beacons of death. Now it was coming to take them.